welcome to this new episode of Sawal That Matters. The Sawal that mattered to the entire world was the crisis which it faced 10 days back. The 12 days of conflict between Iran and Israel rattled the globe. There are many ongoing conflicts in the globe currently, but today, in this episode, we'll specifically discuss the conflict between Iran and Israel, and moreover, we'll also know the history. Why are these two countries fighting? To know and to decode more on this subject, I'm joined by a very special guest today. I have with me Mr. Atul Aneja, a very senior journalist and a strategic analyst. He was posted in the Middle East to observe the countries, the ongoing politics, and its effects on the globe. Welcome, Mr. Aneja, on Sawal That Matters.
You're very welcome, Diksha. My pleasure.
फर्स्ट ऑफ ऑल आई वुड लाइक टू अंडरस्टैंड फ्रॉम यू मिस्टर अनेजा कि जो अभी 12 दिन की कॉन्फ्लिक्ट थी, सब पूरी दुनिया ने ये 12 दिन की कॉन्फ्लिक्ट देखी. ईरान इजराइल दे वर बॉम्बिंग ईच अदर एंड बीच में यूएस भी आ गया था विच लेड टू वेरी heightened tensions. But here I would like to bring your attention and draw your attention to one very pertinent point. आखिर ये दो देश लड़ क्यों रहे हैं, इनकी हिस्ट्री क्या है? और आपसे मैं ये जानना चाहूंगी कि 1948 was the year when Israel was as a country was formed. So could you just elaborate a little more on this?
Look, Diksha, we will not be able to understand this story without the story of oil. That is at the heart of it. And it precedes 1948, which is the year of the birth of Israel, which takes place soon after the end of the Second World War. We have to go back at 1904, the invention of the internal combustion engine, which exponentially and dramatically increased the demand for oil. And since naval ships, let's say, of the British Navy or the colonial British Navy were transitioning from coal to oil, there was also lack of self-sufficiency of that material because oil was not available in Britain. So the British Empire, the French and others, including the Germans had their own, in fact, they were the ones who converted from coal to oil for their naval operations, naval warships, even before the British. In fact, that was a pressure on the British to sort of transition quickly. And Winston Churchill was the Lord of the Admiralty at that time, before he became Prime Minister, who pushed for this conversion. Now the problem arose, where do you get that oil? Which is important for your industrial and war potential. And that is where the hunt for oil goes on, and the Middle East or West Asia, North Africa comes into the picture. The British were the ones who zeroed on to Iran, and it was the oil refinery in Abadan which came up to process the oil which was available in large quantities, which had been discovered in these regions before that. Before Iran, in fact, it was Bahrain was the first country where oil was discovered in this region, and thereafter huge quantities of oil were found in Iraq, in a place called Baba Gurgur, the oil field, and again Iran. And Abadan was a very, very important strategic refinery. And in order to secure their control over oil, and in this case Iran, then there was the colonial push to bring Iran into their sphere of influence. And that is where the Iran story really begins, the control over oil in Iran. This is interwar period, and increases as the demand for oil increases during the Second World War. So now that we understand the strategic importance of Iran, Iran itself was resisting this pressure to be controlled by a colonial power, and this resulted in election of a prime minister called Mohammad Mossadegh, very nationalist prime minister. And that is where the problems with the British really start. And so the story of today goes back at least to 1953, when Mossadegh was removed in a military coup.
In
by the
Iran.
British in Iran.
Okay.
And it was called, if I recall, it was called Operation Ajax, which was a MI6 CIA operation. And that is where Mossadegh gets overthrown and you have regime change. The first regime change really takes place 1953. And Mossadegh is replaced by what became the British and the American puppet, which was the Shah of Iran. And that cycle goes on till 1979, when the Shah is overthrown now, and you have the Islamists coming in under Khomeini. And once again, there is a reversal of the regime change which had taken place in 1953. So 79 is another very major benchmark when the Islamic Revolution takes place. It acquires very, very nationalistic overtones and is a huge loss for the Western country as a whole. Specifically, British are now the junior partners of the Americans. So the Americans are the one who are hit the most by what happened in 1979. The hostility to Americans is very strong among the new regime or the new government of Khomeini, which comes in. There is an attempt to topple again Khomeini and the Islamists who had masterminded this revolution of 1979. And frankly, it was Saddam Hussein of Iraq who was propped up for this regime change operation again, now again by the Americans, French, and others. And so they fought an 8-year war. 79, the revolution takes place in Iran. So 1980, if I recall, 80 or even 80, I think, when there is the Iran-Iraq war. And for 8 years they fight. The ultimate objective was to overthrow the revolution to have a counter revolution in Iran. And finally, that too fails. And that's where one comes into the nuclear dimension. Now, it's interesting that Iran's nuclear program starts somewhere in the middle, somewhere in between the Iran-Iraq war. And frankly, by 2003, when Saddam Hussein is overthrown, so the threat gets removed as far as Iran is concerned. In the absence of the threat from Iraq, this is another interesting turning point in the Iranian nuclear program, and it is American intelligence assessment, a combined report of all the intelligence agencies put together in the United States, which comes up at a report, if I recall, it was 2007 or 2008, which categorically states that Iran stopped the militarization of its nuclear program, and which had turned into a civilian nuclear program. And that's the story till now. The Iranians keep maintaining that their nuclear program is for peaceful purposes, unlike what Israel says. And till very late, till when the JCPOA, the nuclear deal with the Obama administration takes place, and your cameras are placed, IAEA inspections are tightened, and Iran is allowed to permit 3.7% enrichment. Now that's important. This percentage is important because if you want to convert uranium into a bomb grade material, then your enrichment has to cross 90%.
Okay.
So this was the case at that time when Trump administration comes up in 2016 and walks out of the nuclear deal, or the JCPOA, which was negotiated by the previous administration along with 5 or 6 other countries. But the nuclear deal is important. And Trump walks out of that. And you have a new situation coming up by this time. And you do not have the mechanisms of enforcement under the JCPOA. So that's a phase when 2016 to the present, when Iran remains a part of the NPT, Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, which Iran had signed, which allows Iran to do enrichment for peaceful purposes under the monitoring of an agency called the International Atomic Energy Agency. So that process was going on. There was a period before the JCPOA was signed of intensive inspections were carried out, where despite all the accusations that Iran was going in for a nuclear weapon, there was no evidence which was found by the International Atomic Energy Agency. So that's where we are.
Yeah,
The
actually, I you explained what happened till date. My question here is because Israel is a major player in all of this, so everything starts and ends there. My question here is, how was Israel formed, and where did Jews come from? And there was a war in 1948, and I would also like to mention this to the viewers that Iran was the country which was the first, one of the first country to establish diplomatic ties with Israel. And today, the tensions you all have seen. But first of all, could you just explain us how was Israel formed? Where did Jews come from? And what role do they play when it comes to US and its politics? And why are they so important?
Okay, bundle of questions. Now, the first thing is how was Israel formed? Interesting one, you have to go back again to the First World War because the shape of the Middle East in terms of its constituents is determined by the breakup of the Ottoman Empire. The
Okay.
entire territories were part of the Ottoman Empire. Iran was not, but large part of the Middle East as we know today was part of the Ottoman Empire. So Israel comes into emergence when there are two people who carve out actually the new map of the Middle East as we know. One of them, and one is a Frenchman and one is a British. And the British guy's name is Mark Sykes,
Okay.
and the French man is George Picot. These were two diplomats who were in charge while the First World War was going on to define the contours of the new Middle East. And that is where mandates are given to the point is that this whole area is divided into by colonial powers, especially the British and the French. So you have a large portion like Syria, Lebanon, I think parts of Anatolia, which go to France, whereas this territory of Iraq, especially southern Iraq, the oil-bearing part of Iraq goes to the British, and as does Palestine, which is a much larger entity. So the, and but it is not directly governed by Britain, but it is under an international mandate under the League of Nations. So that's where the Palestine becomes an entity as as a derivative of the breakup of the Ottoman Empire. Now comes what happens to Israel within Palestine. And that's where year 1917 is a very important year, Diksha, because that,
1917.
yeah, 1917.
Okay.
Because 1917 is a declaration called the Balfour Declaration
Okay.
by a British administrator. And Balfour, it's about a 4 or 5 line declaration, which essentially says that this will be the place where Israel will be created along with the rest of the Palestine. So the division of the Palestinian region really can originates from 1917 Balfour Declaration. And as you said at the beginning, finally it leads to the formation of Israel in 1948. After that, because in between is a very major event, which is the Second World War and the Holocaust, which takes place, which gives a moral justification of a Jewish homeland. Your second question, where did they come from? Essentially, the first they came in waves. That is the Israeli settlers.
Okay.
The first wave really comes from Europe after the Second World War. And these European Jews, quite sophisticated, socialistic in orientation, and who became the heart of the Labour Party in Israel later, are called the Ashkenazis,
Okay.
which were the European Jews. And then you have subsequent migrations which take place. Ashkenazis are essentially behind the Labour Party broadly. And then you have the waves coming from Ethiopia, from former Soviet Union. The Soviet Jews come in around 87, 88. That's another wave. And then from Africa, there's a large migration which takes place, which are the Haderi Jews. and form really the core of the Likud party of Netanyahu.
Yeah, the current
And
ruling party over there.
the, the current Likud party. So Hazaris are very important constitution, as are some of the Eastern Europe migrants which migrate from Eastern Europe as well. Western Europe generally go into labor, but then later on there's a spillover as well. But essentially, that is how the political complexion of Israel is shaped. The Hazaris and Eastern Europe is part of the right-wing Russian Jews are really the core of this very right-wing party, Likud, and which has ultra-right to it as well. Then there are Orthodox Jews which come in, which
Okay.
are sort of part of this combination. So that's where you have this situation. Now comes the third part, that the Labour Party had produced a leader called Yitzhak Rabin. Rabin essentially also got the Nobel Peace Prize because he and Yasser Arafat, the Palestinian leader, had come to agreement of a two-state solution, which is the Palestinian areas will form a separate state and the Jewish areas will form a separate state. And that was around 2000, thereabout. We are getting into the 21st century now. But it is a result of lengthy negotiations which start in 1984. It concluded, 1984, which is called the Oslo Accords. The
Okay.
Oslo Accords are the background or the which map out the two-state solution. And these two gentlemen, that is Yitzhak Rabin and Yasser Arafat, are the face of it. And you have other people, important figures have been earlier. The process becomes earlier. So earlier we had Jimmy Carter was a figure, and you had Menachem Begin from Israel earlier, but it was signed during Bill Clinton's time, and these were the two people, which is Rabin and Arafat. Now, what happens is that the whole two-state solution goes for a six.
Okay.
It happens with a very dramatic event, which is the assassination of Rabin by a right-wing Jew.
Okay.
So once Rabin is out of the equation, the reversal of the two-state solution in a way begins, which the next benchmark is the death of Arafat and the rise of Hamas.
Uh,
So, by
Hamas,
this time,
which is a proxy of Iran currently.
well, it's a very interesting history, Diksha. It's not so straightforward. How
Okay.
was Hamas raised? Hamas is a part of the Muslim Brotherhood. It's an offshoot of the Muslim Brotherhood. Sheikh Yassin was a part of the Muslim Brotherhood,
And we are moving
right?
to Egypt with the Muslim Brotherhood, if I'm not
Yes,
wrong.
yes. Yeah, Egypt, and later on it moves to Qatar and then and Turkey in the
Okay.
in the recent years. But yes, Egypt is the fount of the Muslim Brotherhood. So Sheikh Yassin and the Hamas, there is enough evidence, or you'll find, which shows that Hamas was actually raised by was a product of the Mossad, because
Okay.
it was raised to counter Arafat, which was the
Oh,
PLO, Palestine Liberation Organization, which was its heyday, the one which had also signed the Oslo Accord. So that's where the reversal takes place. There's a fight between Hamas and PLO. PLO has its armed wing called the Al Aqsa Martyrs Brigade. And
okay.
I happened to cover that when I was posted in the region, where the PLO and the Al Aqsa Martyrs Brigade were hounded out by Hamas in Gaza and actually taken to tops of buildings and thrown from there to the ground. I mean, it was very brutal kind of takeover which Hamas did from Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigades and the PLO. And Arafat dies, so they also lose a leader. And you
Okay.
have Mahmoud Abbas, who is presently there, but he is no patch to what Arafat was.
Huh.
Arafat was a hugely charismatic figure and a larger than life personality. So with the leadership finished almost virtually of the PLO and the Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigade, the whole network, the PLO network, that gave the space for Hamas to occupy the region. Of course, there are two parts of it. One is Gaza, other is the West Bank of the Jordan River. And so you still have pockets of influence of Fatah, which is also PLO, which has its influence in that part. But essentially, it's Hamas which sort of takes over the territory and becomes a leader of the Palestinians. It wins elections in Gaza. Gaza is cordoned off, and a fence is created around it by the Israelis, and it has its underground tunnels and supply lines extending up to Egypt, which is the main source, but also establishes very strong contacts, by the way, with the Syrians. Because I happened to interview the Hamas leadership in
Wow.
2010 or 2011, somewhere there, in Damascus. Yeah, so this is, you'll find it in the website of the Hindu probably. My interview was Marzouk with number two of Hamas. And
Okay.
so if you can type my name, Hindu, and Marzouk, you'll probably get it on the website. So you see, that is what happens, that it's the Syrians who are allies of the Iranians by this time.
Okay.
So the network and the Hamas together. But in some way, Hamas actually backstabs the Syrians, because they once the regime change processes start in the region, they all virtually flee from Damascus, and then go into a much more comfortable and a better environment in Qatar.
Okay.
First in Egypt, essentially, then Qatar. So that is where the Qatar, and where they're also fated by the Iranians and by the Turks. So that's where the present support system of Hamas, you can track it
Okay.
from how from the main opposition, actually proxies of Israel,
Hmm.
then move into, if you raise a organization, that is Israel raised it, but then finally it acquires a life of its own and turns on its own masters. So the Israeli experiment is successful in removal of Arafat, but Hamas, which he thought would be a substitute and their sort of ally, or a puppet, if you want, that doesn't take place, because then Hamas joins the Turks and the Qataris and the Iranians, and that is where we are. In the meantime, in Israel, the discourse in terms of who is your enemy changes
Okay.
from the Palestinians, because the Israelis now feel comfortable after the Hamas comes, after Arafat is out of the equation, that they have a grip over Palestine broadly. But again, you need an enemy always to sustain your relationship with the Americans and your supply lines, military. Otherwise, your idea of victimhood, that sort of has to be reinforced all the time. And it is mostly Netanyahu who cites Iran as the main enemy. So the
Okay.
focus shifts from the Palestinian to Iran. And to have Israel's allies backing Israel completely, you have this whole narrative of Iran acquiring a nuclear weapon, and therefore regime change in Iran is essential. That idea has been going on for some time, but it really gets in a new life of its own during what's happened in the last couple of years, which is essentially after the Hamas terror attack on Israel, and thereafter we know what's happened. So it is in this context when Israel knocks out Hezbollah. So what is so called the resistance front, which has been formed by Iran, Hezbollah, Houthis, and Syria. So they start knocking out the dominoes, and finally it reaches where we are, a full-scale attempt. Well, initially it was supposed to be to defang Iran's nuclear program. So these initial strikes which took place on all Iranian nuclear facilities. But somewhere in the middle of it, I think the Israelis also changed or mutated their war objective from neutralizing Iran's nuclear capacity to regime change. But that experiment has not worked. Because despite everything, Iran was able to hit back at Israel and hit pretty, strategic areas inside. The lack of territory of Israel also gets exposed here. So, you Iranians look at Haifa port, they look at the major high-tech industry of Israel and military targets somewhere, which and some Ben Gurion airport. So there is a retaliation which is, Iran doesn't cave in. Second thing, which probably Israelis in the West people expected, was an internal revolt inside Iran against their government, against the Islamist government, but that also hasn't happened. So Iran has survived this attempt. The Americans come into the picture, which you mentioned. They attacked Fordo with the bunker buster bomb. We don't know as yet how much real damage has been done, although the Americans, including President Trump, claims that they have obliterated Iran's nuclear capacity and
But
set
there
it
are
back.
conflicting reports on that.
There are conflicting reports on that. The Iranians say they had shifted out the materials in Fordo, which is a mountain under deep inside which they had located the centrifuges, which are the spinning machines, Diksha, which refine uranium to a certain level. So they had already refined material over there. So there is a view that Iranians had already enriched up to 60% and have removed that stockpile and put it somewhere else. That's what the Iranians do. This is entering into a gray zone right now. So that's where we are. So this is in a snapshot the backdrop and the history of the current conflict, Diksha. There are a lot of complexities about it, a lot of other elements which go into it, but broadly, I think this is the sketch. If you look at that, you might be able to better understand the current developments. Not comprehensive, but perhaps may help.
Mr. Aneja, we will come back on this entire topic in our next episode. So, viewers, please join us for the part two of this entire episode on the history of Iran and Israel conflict and the other complexities in the Middle East and the Arab region. Thank you so much, Mr. Aneja, for sparing your time and sharing this knowledge with us. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome, Diksha.